I'm Anna George Meek, pronouns she, her, and I want to talk today about the intimate subversion in today's texts. But first, I should introduce myself since I'm a newbie. 20 years ago, I started attending St. Stephen's with some guy named Matt Gladue. I teach English to first-generation college students and immigrants at Normandale Community College, and poetry to grad students at Hamline University. My whole life, I've defined myself as a devout interloper, but I seem to have found a home at Spirit with all of you. So, it's easy to look at today's readings and hear a focus on final judgment and the last day. Myself, raised outside the Catholic tradition, I struggle with ideas of condemnation and, in Matthew's words, everlasting fire. I am struck more by our present day with its own crises and call. Is this not a time where we must reckon with ourselves? Today is the last Sunday in ordinary time, and we stand on a precipice of great transition this November morning. And in today's texts, Ezekiel and Paul and Matthew tell us that in a moment of reckoning, we must open ourselves to something powerful. We must undertake an intimate subversion so that we may build what comes next in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. The last Sunday in ordinary time. It's a term that makes me laugh because what about this time and this year exactly is ordinary? I know that ordinary time refers to the ordinal numbering of weeks, but it's valuable right now to understand the word ordinary in its common use here. It doesn't come as news to any of you that these are days of profound transition. There is no ordinary anymore. As days blur and weeks blend, there is little sense of last or first, new season or old. And the texts speak of extraordinary, extraordinary times. Ezekiel and Paul's warnings are the same. There will be injury and days of clouds. There will be thick darkness. Our human parents will die, and we must face death. We will be scattered. And here we are, scattered. On this last day of ordinary time, we are in the third wave of the pandemic. We are falling into winter. We are ushering in a new federal administration in a divided country. And the gap between rich and poor widens. Luckily, this week, Ezekiel does say that the Holy One will arrive to set things straight and rescue us. Matthew does tell us that a new government will arrive. The promised one will be seated upon the royal throne, and all nations will be assembled below to model what leadership should be like. New governance, finally. But look closely, and the focus of the parable in Matthew's gospel is actually on us. I assure you, the ruler says, as often as you did it to the least of my people, you did it to me. The assurance of Matthew's text isn't so much that we will be rescued. The assurance is that we are the tenders of justice. What we do matters. Our individual actions matter. Our communal actions matter. How we treat one another face to face, and how we think about ourselves as actors in the world. Last week's texts, as Mike so fabulously broke them open for us, call for the dismantling of oppressive institutions. Institutions that leave people hungry, homeless, ill, imprisoned. Mike looked at them from a subversive angle, as he said, subversive from the Latin, to see from below. Today, I want to talk about a more intimate subversion I feel today's texts call us to undertake this last Sunday in ordinary time. If I look at the Indo-European root of subversion, the pith and the heart of this word is ver, W-E-R, meaning to turn, to bend, to transform. How do we turn ourselves toward a new liturgical year, a new time? How do we transform ourselves, perhaps by seeing ourselves from below? So, last week's texts call for the subversion of institutions. This week's texts call for a more intimate subversion, ourselves. This May, my neighborhood burned for the first time after George Floyd's murder. We live 3 blocks from the 3rd Precinct building, where this spring's uprising centered. And that first night, white supremacist kids from the suburbs burned down the AutoZone. And after that first night, Matt and our daughter Sarah and I continued to go to the protests. We met our neighbors there, black, brown, all genders, all ages, many abilities. And all of us, we all scattered when the officers on the precinct rooftop fired tear gas canisters at us. I now hold an image of a Kevlar-clad officer pointing his weapon at my daughter. In that moment, I became aware it's an image I share now with too many other parents, especially parents of children of color. I was turned toward something new, transformed, intimate subversion. The second night our neighborhood burned, the fires were less than a block away on both sides of our house. When we heard rumors the gas lines in the neighborhood had been breached, we took the cats and 2 suitcases of our most important items and evacuated. Friends took us in during the pandemic, no less. We were the strangers, and they welcomed us. I saw myself from a different angle. Intimate subversion. And actually, this May wasn't the first time our neighborhood burned. 10 years ago, the bar down the street and the substandard apartments above it burned and killed 5 people, including 3 small children. First responders set up a tent for the families and survivors on our front lawn. That was where the families were told that the children's bodies had been found. And as long as I live, I will not forget the sound of the parents screaming. We bought them pizza, which isn't enough. It isn't enough to tend to that kind of pain. But we fed the hungry in the way that we could. Sometimes what we do isn't enough. But as Gandhi says, it is most important that we do it. I have to remember that this is different from myself not being enough. And I am grateful to all of you, our spirit community, for constantly reminding me I am enough. And whatever I may do, it is most important that I do it. I see myself differently. In difficult times, another intimate subversion. For years, I've been struggling to think about how to subvert the racism inside me, about how to subvert my own complicity and complacency. And as a shy person, an only child who moved around a lot growing up, a loner who wrestles with what it means to belong anywhere to anything, transient and fairly inconsequential, I'm married to a community organizer who challenges me to understand the ways in which what I do in the world as an individual, it does matter. Internal transformation isn't a single moment, not usually. It's a journey. And the difficult times, the times of reckoning, are part of that journey. In the difficult times, we must reflect. Amid chaos and transition, we have to do work within ourselves. We must do this work so that we may better feed the hungry and understand who the hungry are in the first place, and raise the question, why are they hungry? The intimate subversion of ourselves will change how we see our place in the world and how we must act within it in order to undertake subversions of oppressive institutions. So, my intimate subversion on this last Sunday of Ordinary Times, where I hear a call to action, I am reading Ta-Nehisi Coates, Dennis Smith, Sun Young Shin. I've written our political reps and I'm doing lit drops. I'm listening to my daughter Sarah and other young people talk about the end of gender. And I'm spending more time with our neighbors, a Black family we've lived beside for 20 years, sharing tips on keeping the squirrels off our tomatoes and listening to them tell us what safety does or doesn't feel like for them in our neighborhood. And I am understanding myself as hungry and in need of welcome. And here's one final thing the readings suggest to me, a thing that's hard for me to name. When we take responsibility for one another, when we prepare to govern ourselves and partake in the transformation of the world as it seems to come to an end, something new happens. It's called hope, which seems right, as for these next 5 weeks, we'll wait on tenterhooks for a fragile gift. You know the gift I mean, the small light that arrives at the end of December on a day we call Christmas. I struggle with the idea of hope, whatever it is. That's a different homily. But here's how I hear these readings about a moment of reckoning. If I tend to you with justice, and if you tend to me with justice, if I subvert my own assumptions about how I am in the world and how I can be, then perhaps I can trust that what comes next will be strength and light and hope. So I pose to you these questions. What intimate subversions have you undertaken or undergone this year? What have you been able to see from below during these challenging times? And as we journey through these times into a season of hope, who are you becoming?